"Ma'am, the distinguished visitor spectator area is back behind the yellow line," the staff sergeant said, his voice a practiced blend of authority and strained helpfulness. He stepped directly into her path, a solid wall of starched uniform and youthful certainty. "We need to keep this firing line clear for the active duty personnel." Lillian Grant didn't move. She stood beside the long, formidable rifle resting on its bipod, her fingers loosely curled around the stock. The weapon, an M82 Barrett, 50 caliber, was a brutalist piece of engineering, all hard angles and matte black purpose. It seemed a stark, almost violent contrast to the woman beside it. Her long silver-white hair was pulled back in a simple, elegant knot at the nape of her neck. She wore a bright red tweed jacket, the kind you might see at a university lecture, not on a dusty Army rifle range at Fort Liberty. Her hands, resting near the trigger guard, were weathered, the skin thin over the knuckles and marked with the faint brown spots of age. She simply looked at the young NCO. Her eyes, a pale, clear blue, held his gaze without challenge, without anger, merely with a quiet, unblinking steadiness. It was a stillness honed over decades, a placid surface over an ocean of experience. "I'm in the right place, Sergeant," she said. Her voice was calm, lower than he expected, and carried easily over the gusting wind without any need for volume. The staff sergeant's professional smile tightened. His name tape read Davies. He glanced from her face to the massive rifle, then back again, his expression a cocktail of confusion and annoyance. He was in charge of this range for the annual command showcase, and a civilian, an old woman at that, handling a multi-$1,000 anti-material rifle was a problem he didn't need. "With all due respect, ma'am," he began, shifting his weight, "this is a restricted area. The M82 is not a museum piece. We can't have unauthorized civilians handling the equipment." He gestured vaguely toward a set of bleachers 200 yards away where a few spouses and local dignitaries were gathered. "I can have one of my soldiers escort you over to the proper viewing section." Lillian's hand shifted slightly, her thumb tracing the familiar curve of the pistol grip. "My credentials are in order." They were checked at the gate, and again at range control. Davies's patience was visibly fraying. He saw an elderly woman in a conspicuously civilian jacket who seemed confused, or worse, stubborn. He didn't see the posture, straight as a parade ground flagpole despite the slight stoop of her shoulders. He didn't see the economy of her movement, the way her body was perfectly balanced, feet planted, ready to absorb the cannon-like recoil of the weapon beside her. He saw gray hair and wrinkles, not a lifetime of discipline etched into muscle memory. "Ma'am, I'm the range safety officer. What credentials could you possibly have that authorize you to be on my firing line?" He made a show of looking at her red jacket. "You're not in uniform. You're not on the roster for today's demonstration, so I'm going to have to ask you again to please step back behind the line." A few of the younger soldiers on the line prepping their own weapons had started to notice the quiet confrontation. They watched with furtive curiosity. An old woman in a tweed coat being told off by the range NCO was more interesting than checking their windage charts for the 10th time. Lillian reached into the pocket of her slacks and produced a laminated ID card. It was a standard-issue Department of the Army civilian contractor card. Davies took it, his skepticism barely concealed. He scanned the name, Lillian Grant. The photo was a decade old, the face fuller, the hair still retaining streaks of dark brown, but the eyes were the same, unwavering. "A contractor ID," Davies said, handing it back with a dismissive flick of his wrist. "That lets you on post, ma'am. It doesn't let you handle a crew-served weapon. You need a range card, a qualification record, a letter of authorization." He was ticking off the regulations on his fingers now, his voice rising with the self-assurance of someone who lived and breathed the rulebook. "It's in the system, Sergeant. Under my DOD ID number," Lillian said, her tone still maddeningly even. Davies scoffed, a short, sharp burst of air. "Ma'am, our system is for active personnel. I can't just look up civilian records from 20 years ago." He gestured to her face, a clumsy, instantly regrettable move. "No offense, but you look like you've been retired for a long time. The qualifications expire." The insult, a casual slice of ageism, hung in the air. Lillian's expression didn't change, but a profound stillness settled over her. She seemed to draw into herself, a fortress of calm against his rising tide of frustration. He had crossed a line, moving from procedural diligence to personal dismissal. He pressed his advantage, seeing her silence as acquiescence. "Look, I don't want to embarrass you. Let's just call it a misunderstanding. Why don't you go enjoy the static displays? They have a C-130 open for tours over by the airfield." He took a step closer, intending to gently but firmly guide her away from the rifle, His eyes fell on a small, tarnished object pinned to the lapel of her red jacket. It was barely an inch long, a piece of dark, worn silver shaped like a curved tusk or tooth. It was simple, unadorned, and looked ancient. It was nothing like the gleaming, colorful insignia common in the modern army. "And what's that supposed to be?" he asked, his tone dripping with condescension. "Some kind of souvenir?" Lillian's fingers went to the pin, her touch as light as a breath. The world around her didn't so much fade as it was replaced, for a single searing heartbeat. The scent of pine and Georgia dust was gone, replaced by the smell of pulverized concrete, diesel fumes, and something metallic like old blood in the blistering heat of Ramadi. The bright blue sky overhead became a dome of hazy, sun-bleached white. The crisp pop-pop-pop of distant M4s was replaced by the deafening, gut-punching roar of a .50 caliber firing from inside a small, shattered room. She felt the phantom weight of her body armor, the grit of sand under her eyelids, the voice of her spotter, a young sergeant named Casey, whispering in her ear. 300 meters. Rooftop, second from the left. Wind is negligible. Send it. Her finger tightened on a trigger just like the one she was touching now. The memory was gone as quickly as it came, a flash echo of a life he could never comprehend. She looked back at Staff Sergeant Davies, her pale blue eyes holding a new depth, a shadow of things seen and done. "Something like that," she said softly. The confrontation had now drawn more significant attention. Across the range, standing near a covered pavilion set up for the senior leadership, Command Sergeant Major Wallace had been observing the preparations. He was a man in his late 50s, his career spanning from the Cold War to the endless conflicts in the Middle East. He had seen the quiet standoff starting, dismissing it as a minor issue, but it had gone on too long. The young staff sergeant was getting louder, more animated. The old woman remained still. He started walking over, a sense of duty compelling him to intervene before the staff sergeant made a complete fool of himself. He was still 50 yards away when he heard the name, carried on a gust of wind. "Have to check the system, Miss Grant." Wallace froze mid-stride. Grant. The name struck a chord deep in his memory. A name spoken with a mixture of reverence and fear in hushed tents and smoky NCO clubs 20 years ago. A ghost story. A legend. He squinted, trying to get a better look at her. The long gray hair, the civilian jacket. It couldn't be. Then he saw the M82, and it all clicked into place with the force of a physical blow. He raised his field glasses, his hands suddenly unsteady. He focused on the woman, zooming past the increasingly flustered staff sergeant. He saw her face, the lines of age, but the same bone structure, the same unwavering eyes he remembered from a single terrifying briefing at sniper school when he was a young specialist. And then he saw it, pinned to her lapel. The small, dark, curved tooth. The hedgehog's tooth. "Oh my God," Wallace breathed. His blood ran cold. He knew exactly what that pin meant. It wasn't a souvenir. It was a marker of belonging to one of the most exclusive and dangerous fraternities in the entire U.S. military, a unit that technically didn't exist on any official roster, the pioneers of the Hunter of Gunmen program. He fumbled for his phone, his fingers thick and clumsy. He didn't call the range control officer. He didn't call the post commander. He scrolled straight to the top of his recent calls and hit the number for the visiting general's aide-de-camp. "Captain," Wallace said, his voice low and urgent, devoid of all pleasantries. "This is CSM Wallace. You need to get General Madsen. Now, get him down to range 37 immediately. There's a situation." "A situation, Sergeant Major?" The aide's voice was skeptical. "We're in the middle of a brief." "I don't care if he's briefing the Joint Chiefs." Wallace cut him off, his voice a harsh whisper. "Do you know who Staff Sergeant Davies is harassing on the firing line right now? It's Lillian Grant. Master Sergeant Grant, retired." He paused, letting the name sink in. "Yes, that Grant. Spectre. And she's standing next to a goddamn Barrett." The silence on the other end of the line was absolute. Then a muffled curse and the sound of a chair scraping back violently. "We're on our way." Inside the Mobile Tactical Operations Center, a climate-controlled trailer humming with electronics, Brigadier General Madsen was listening to a PowerPoint presentation on new drone capabilities. He was a lean, sharp-featured man in his early 50s, a career infantry officer who had commanded at every level. His aide, a young, sharp captain, suddenly appeared at his elbow, his face pale. He leaned in and whispered urgently in the general's ear. Madsen's expression shifted from bored attention to mild irritation at the interruption. "Grant?" he whispered back. "I don't know any Lillian Grant." The captain was already swiping furiously at a ruggedized tablet. He turned the screen to the general. It showed a bare-bones Department of the Army personnel file. The photo was from the early 2000s. The name was Lillian M. Grant, rank MSG, Master Sergeant, and then the awards and decorations started to load. Combat Infantryman Badge, Ranger Tab, Master Parachutist Badge, Bronze Star with V device and 2 oak leaf clusters, Meritorious Service Medal, Army Commendation Medal, a list of campaign ribbons that read like a history of American conflict for the last 40 years. Panama, Kuwait, Somalia, Iraq, Afghanistan. Madsen's eyes widened. He scrolled down. Schools, U.S. Army Sniper School, Distinguished Honor Graduate, Special Operations Target Interdiction Course, SOTIC, Ranger School, Class 489, one of the first women to ever pass. Her last official assignment was listed as Special Projects, Asymmetric Warfare Group, a notorious euphemism for operations that were best left undocumented. Spectre, Madsen breathed, the old call sign hitting him like a forgotten memory. He'd heard stories when he was a young lieutenant, a sniper in Panama and later Mogadishu, who was so effective, so phantom-like, the enemy thought they were being hunted by a ghost. Most soldiers assumed the stories were exaggerations, a myth. "Sir," the aide said, his voice tight. "CSM Wallace says she's on the line at range 37, and the NCOIC is about to have her escorted off by the MPs. A cold, hard fury settled over General Madsen. He stood up so abruptly his chair screeched backward. The briefing officer faltered and fell silent. "Get the command vehicle." Madsen's voice was quiet, but it cut through the hum of the TOC like a razor. "Now, and get me Colonel Eva Rostova. She needs to see this." Back on the firing line, Staff Sergeant Davies had reached the end of his rope. Lillian Grant's calm, silent refusal to be dismissed felt like a personal challenge to his authority in front of his soldiers. He had tried being helpful, then firm, then threatening. Nothing worked. "Ma'am, that's it. I've given you every opportunity to comply," he said, his voice now loud and strained. He unclipped the radio from his vest. "You are a safety violation and a security risk. I am having you escorted from this range. Your contractor credentials are being revoked pending an investigation. And that pin," he gestured at the silver tusk, "is an unauthorized decoration. For all I know, it's fraudulent." The accusation of fraud, of stolen valor, was the ultimate insult. Yet Lillian's expression remained a placid mask, though the blue of her eyes seemed to chill by several degrees. "I think you should put the radio down, Sergeant," she advised, her voice still quiet. "You think you can tell me what to do on my range?" Davies laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. He raised the radio to his mouth. "Watch post 4. This is range 37. I need MP assistance for a civilian removal." He never finished the transmission. A sudden sharp crunch of tires on gravel silenced him. A convoy of 3 black government Suburbans and a lead Humvee screeched to a halt just yards behind the firing line, kicking up a cloud of red dust. Doors flew open with practiced urgency. General Madsen emerged from the lead vehicle, his face a thunderous mask. He was followed by CSM Wallace, his aide, and a full-bird colonel, a sharp, intelligent-looking woman with a command presence that radiated authority. They moved with a singular, focused purpose, their boots barely making a sound on the hard-packed earth. The entire range went dead silent. Soldiers snapped to attention. The background chatter, the wind, everything seemed to hold its breath. Davies froze, his hand still holding the radio, his mouth agape. His world had just been turned upside down. A 1-star general and his entire command team had just descended upon his range like a thunderbolt from a clear sky. General Madsen strode past Davies as if he were a piece of furniture. He didn't look at him, didn't acknowledge his existence. His eyes were locked on Lillian. He stopped directly in front of her, his polished boots inches from her sensible leather shoes. The contrast was startling. The towering, decorated general in his crisp duty uniform and the small, gray-haired woman in her bright red jacket. Then, General Madsen's back went ramrod straight. He raised his hand in a salute so sharp, so precise, it could have cracked glass. It was a gesture of profound, unadulterated respect. "Master Sergeant Grant." His voice boomed across the silent range, clear and powerful. "It is an honor to see you again, ma'am." Lillian, for the first time, allowed a flicker of a smile to touch her lips. She gave a slight, acknowledging nod. "General, it's been a long time." Madsen held the salute for a moment longer before dropping his hand. He then turned, slowly, to face the assembled crowd of wide-eyed soldiers and the utterly petrified Staff Sergeant Davies. "For those of you who don't know who this soldier is," Madsen began, his voice taking on the cadence of a formal citation, "allow me to educate you. You are in the presence of a living legend." He pointed a finger not at Lillian, but at the Ranger tab insignia on his own uniform. I was a brand new lieutenant when I went through Ranger school. Master Sergeant Grant, then a staff sergeant, had already been through it. She was one of the very first women to earn this tab, and she did it without any modified standards, without any exceptions. She outran, outmarched, and outshot half her class. He paused, letting the information settle. The younger soldiers exchanged glances of disbelief. When this nation went into Panama, she was there. When a Black Hawk went down in Mogadishu, she was part of the security element at the crash site, holding the perimeter. She served in Desert Storm, Bosnia, and when the global war on terror began, she volunteered for back-to-back tours in both Iraq and Afghanistan. His gaze swept over the crowd, finally landing on the M82 rifle. She wasn't a cook, she wasn't a clerk. She was a sniper. She was one of the founding members of an elite target interdiction unit that hunted high-value targets when many of you were still in grade school. Her call sign was Spectre. The enemy was so terrified of her they thought she was a ghost. She has more confirmed, long-range engagements with this very weapon system than anyone on this post. She probably wrote the doctrine you studied to qualify with it. He then walked over and pointed directly at the small silver tusk on Lillian's jacket. And this pin, he said, his voice dropping with reverence, is not a souvenir. It's a hog's tooth. It was given to graduates of one of the most demanding sniper courses ever conceived. It signifies that the person wearing it is a hunter of gunmen, a master of their craft. It is rarer than a Medal of Honor. He turned his full, wrathful attention to Staff Sergeant Davies, who looked as if he might faint. The general's voice became quiet, dangerously so. "Sergeant," Madsen said, each word a chip of ice, "you stand on a range that exists because of the service and sacrifice of soldiers like Master Sergeant Grant. Your duty as an NCO is to enforce standards, yes, but it is also to see the soldier, not just the uniform. Your bias, your assumption that an older woman couldn't possibly be one of the most accomplished soldiers in this army's history, has led you to disgrace yourself, your rank, and this installation. You failed to verify. You failed to respect. You failed, Sergeant." The silence that followed was heavy and suffocating. Lillian finally spoke, her voice cutting through the tension. "General, with all due respect." All eyes snapped to her. The sergeant was attempting to enforce safety standards. His approach was flawed, but his intent was not. She looked directly at Davies, her expression not one of anger, but of something akin to disappointment. "The standards are the only thing that matters, Sergeant Davies. They are what keep us alive. They must be applied fairly, to everyone, regardless of their gender or their age. My hair is gray, yes, but my eyes still work. Experience doesn't expire with youth. It's earned. And the only thing gray hair truly means is that you've survived the things that broke younger men." As she spoke, the world flickered again, but this time the memory wasn't of combat. It was the memory that was the true origin of her wisdom. A young ranger, barely 20, lying beside her on a rooftop in Afghanistan. His hands were shaking so badly he couldn't get a clear sight picture on the target. He was terrified. Lillian hadn't shouted. She had placed her calm, steady hand over his. "Breathe with me, son," she had whispered. "Let it out slow. The rifle is a tool. You are the weapon. Squeeze. Don't pull. Let the weapon do the work." The shot had been perfect. She hadn't just taught him how to shoot. She had taught him how to be calm in the face of chaos. That was her real legacy. The fallout was swift and decisive. General Madsen didn't have Staff Sergeant Davies punished in a way that would end his career, but the lesson was seared into his soul. Davies was reassigned to the post's training directorate and tasked with developing a new block of instruction for all NCOs. It was officially called the Historical Veterans Protocol, but everyone on post knew it as the Lillian Grant Rule. It was a mandatory training session on unconscious bias, focusing on the contributions of women and older veterans, using declassified stories of pioneers like Lillian to hammer the point home. The standard operating procedures for range access were also updated, streamlining the process for credentialed veterans and contractors, ensuring that assumptions could never again override verified data. A week later, Lillian was in the post commissary, picking out a bag of coffee. She was wearing a simple blue dress, looking every bit the kindly grandmother. She heard a hesitant voice behind her. "Ma'am, Master Sergeant Grant?" She turned to see a humbled Staff Sergeant Davies. He was in civilian clothes, looking younger and far less certain of himself. He held a small notebook in his hands. "Sergeant," she said, her voice neutral. He stood stiffly, unable to meet her eyes. "Ma'am, I wanted to apologize. Properly. What I did was inexcusable. There's no excuse for it. I was arrogant, and I was wrong. Deeply wrong. I'm sorry." The apology was genuine, born of a week of profound humiliation and reflection. Lillian studied him for a long moment. She saw not an enemy, but a young soldier who had learned a hard lesson. "Apology accepted, Sergeant," she said simply. She then offered a small, weary smile. "The most dangerous thing on any battlefield isn't a bullet or a bomb. It's an assumption. It'll get you killed faster than anything else. You assumed what I was based on what you saw, not who I am." He nodded, finally looking up. "I understand that now, ma'am." "Good," she said. She put the coffee in her cart and started to turn away, then stopped. "You know Davies," she said, a mischievous glint in her pale blue eyes. "That 2,000-meter target on range 37 is a tricky one. The wind coming over that far berm plays games with a .50 BMG round. Most people can't read it right." She looked him up and down. "Be at the range tomorrow." 0800, "I'll show you a thing or two about how an old woman reads the wind." A slow, amazed smile spread across Davies's face. It was not forgiveness. It was something far better. It was a chance. "Yes, ma'am," he said, his voice filled with a new kind of respect. "I'll be there." If you were inspired by Lillian's story, please like, share, and subscribe to She Chose Valor. Your support helps us continue to honor the courage and legacy of all our veterans, ensuring their incredible stories are never forgotten. Join us for more tales of heroism next week.